friends. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Page Turners Plus. Today, we are discussing Marcia Douglas's newest novel, the Jamaica Collection of the Shante Dream Arkive. Thank you for joining us, Marcia.
Thank you for having me.
Um, those of you who watch us very often will remember Lindsay as a contributing artist. Lindsay is joining us as a regular team member, and this is the first time he'll be um, acting in that capacity. Those I think those of you who watch us often know that Lindsay is a star poet, but we'll discuss that at another time when we officially give him his flowers. Marcia, let's start off with the foreword of your novel, which is one of the most powerful forewords I've ever read in my entire life.
Mhm.
Um, you mentioned that in this work, as well as in your earlier works, you rethink genre, you resist genre, and you conclude the foreword by saying that the writer writes like an outlaw, and the reader is invited to read like one too. Are you able to give the reader any practical advice
Mm.
on how to go about reading like an outlaw?
Thank you, Paula. Um, well, I would say that reading like an outlaw is really simply an invitation to be open to what the text has to offer, and also to be open to the form of the text as well. As a writer, I take a lot of risks in the writing of this narrative, in terms of its structure and its various ticks and so forth and so on. Arguably, maybe I even break some rules or so-called rules. So there's a way in which I'm being an outlaw. And so this is an invitation for the reader. It seems to me that it requires that sort of reading as well, to put aside whatever assumptions one might have about what a novel is supposed to look like or sound like, and come along with me for the journey, for the ride. The novel also is about literally what it means to be an outlaw in other ways, also. So there are various permutations of outlaw here. With which I'm engaging, and so I'm setting the reader up, that this is the way to navigate this text.
It's interesting we start from the place of outlawness because I have a question about the paratextual for you, Marcia. Like there is, in my opinion, a sort of distinction happening in between what is textual and what is paratextual in this text. Or maybe there isn't. Maybe that is also a part of the point of the formal aspects of the text, right? But I wanted to ask you about this question of the paratextual. Can you say a little bit more about if you make distinctions in between the paratextual elements and the textual elements, and how those distinctions inform the messaging behind the text?
Right. Um, by the paratextual elements, maybe to clarify for any listener viewers who haven't read the book, you're referring to footnotes and
Right.
photographs, images, all of those sorts of things,
Yes.
which I use. Um, so I'm not really distinguishing so much. To me, it's all part of the storytelling. Sometimes I shift gears a little bit, and maybe there's a drawing or a footnote or an image or something of that sort. But it's all part of this same narrative and different modes of telling is what I would say. So they're not there simply for embellishment. They are intertwined with the story. And keep in mind that this is an archive, and an archive has objects and things in it. So these are the details, maybe sometimes the ephemera, but important ephemera nonetheless, of the archive and of the whole narrative. So for me, they're an integral part of the storytelling. Um, and sometimes there might be a footnote or something of that sort, and it takes the reader to another dimension of the story. It's a way to dig deeper into the archive. Does that make sense?
Before the novel even opens, we hear from Carmen Innocencia,
Mm,
a character from your novel Notes on a Writer's Book of Cures and Spells,
mm,
and Angela, who is a character from The Marvelous Equations of the Dread.
mm-hmm,
Um, Quaco in this novel reminded me of a boy that we met in The Marvelous Equations of a Dread who was hung from a silk cotton tree at Halfway Tree for singing freedom songs.
mm-hmm.
Um, and I've given serious thought to whether the character in this novel, 20A, is a character known as Alva Donovan in Notes from a Writer, Notes from a Writer's Cures and Spells. So I was wondering if all of your novels are in conversation with each other.
They are in conversation with each other. They're not sequels as such, but they're certainly in conversation. All of these characters are from related communities. And so there's a way in which they're all part of one big story. I wouldn't say that 20A and Alva in Notes are the same person. However, they are parallel characters with parallel experiences. Uh, that's the way that I would put that. Um, so yes, these characters are all connected. They're all in conversation. In one book, I might be looking at Kingston from one vantage point. In another book, I might zoom into some other Kingston or Jamaica experience. But they're all a community, and they're all in conversation. I would like to think that these characters could cross paths with each other in a certain kind of way, literally. There is one character in the Jamaica Collection who also appears in the Marvelous Equations, who I'd like to point out, and that is the Red Ear Girl. And she has a small role towards the end where she is chasing a flyaway page from a book, and she catches it and reads it. It's just a tiny moment, but she connects these books in a certain kind of way, and grounds those two narratives as well. So, yes, I have fun with that. And also, there are recurring places as well, halfway tree, the silk cotton tree, and so forth and so on. And just a an obsession, I would say, with trees in general.
I like the word obsession that you just used at the end of that statement there. In particular, like for me, like as a reader engaging with the collection and collection with a K, I just want to make
Mm,
that clear. Like engaging with for the first time, the act of running, like seems
mm,
very important to
mm,
the text, but also as a reader engaging with the text, right? Like it
mm,
felt to me there was a sense of urgency as the reader that you inherit from
mm.
reading about the importance of movement, specifically running throughout
Yes.
the text. Like there's also this feeling as a reader to do your best to keep pace with all
Mm,
the sort of changing events that are
hmm.
unfolding at any one point throughout the text. So I have a question for you about fugitivity because I feel like involuntarily as a reader I became a part of that like fugitive theme that sort of is woven throughout this text. Can you say a bit more about fugitivity as it continues to shape not only your work, but the role it plays in Caribbean literary scenes today?
Right. Yes. So it sounds, Lindsay, as though you became an outlaw.
I really enjoyed it too.
Yeah, so fugitivity, I'm looking at how fugitivity has worked into our histories historically, whether that be the fugitivity of runaway slaves, maroon people. or more contemporary manifestations of fugitivity, such as the life of an undocumented immigrant. That's a fugitive state as well. But I also think that there's a sort of fugitivity that I would call mental fugitivity, which is to say, this state of always being in fright or flight from oppressive systems. I think that that's a type of fugitivity as well. It's a state of being. It's an urgency. Um, it's an urge to get away, even if you cannot escape. So this book means to look at all of those different permutations of fugitivity, you might say, to take a look at it and assess and maybe, hopefully, in the look-in, find some agency. I'm also, fugitivity aside, I'm also just interested in movement and migration, how people move, how species move. So human migration, voluntary or forced, also botanical migration, migration of animals, migration of stories, migration of language, and how things change as they move and migrate, whether that's wittingly or unwittingly. So those are some of the threads that I'm playing with and intertwining here. Thanks for that question.
I'm a major fan of Zora Neale Hurston,
Mm,
and I noticed that, well, no one can miss it. You're very interested in Zora Neale Hurston in this novel.
mm,
Um, Particularly, you draw on something she says in Tell My Horse, where she loses her camera.
yes.
And you draw on other things that she says in Tell My Horse. Um, Then you also introduce us to some other women in this
Mm,
novel. One of
yes.
them that I had never heard of before, and you call them the Unmarked Grave Club of Women Geniuses. So,
Yeah.
could you tell us about your relationship with Zora, why you wanted to explore her presence in Jamaica or her work in Jamaica,
Mm.
and why you also wanted to give these unmarked grave club of women geniuses their flowers in this novel? If perhaps you could identify some of them.
Okay. Right. Well, starting with Zora Neale Hurston, um, I would say that she falls into that category for sure of unmarked grave club of women geniuses. I'm thinking of Alice Walker and her search for Zora. I think she wrote about that in Search of Our Mother's Gardens. So I think there's a way in which Black women writers in particular, I would say, regardless of where you are on the globe, that there's something of Walker's search for Zora, which resonates for us, you know, um, and is a sort of rite of passage in a way. So there's a way in which I too I'm acknowledging the work of Hurston and searching for her. However, what really piqued my interest was this detail that she writes about losing her Kodak while on a Guggenheim Fellowship in Jamaica. So I started with that, and you might say that that was a sort of seed for the novel. Um, and it's akin to how, when I was writing The Marvelous Equations, one of the seeds for that book was all of the speculation around Bob Marley's ring and what happened to it, the ring that he supposedly inherited or got from Selassie's son, which belonged to Selassie, and the speculation around what happened to it after he passed away. That was the seed for that novel. And in that case, it became something else where the novel was more than the ring and the search for the ring. It became something larger, and something of a spiritual quest as well. And I had the same experience with this one too, where I began with Zora and this thing which kind of got my interest, what happened to the camera. And then that became a different kind of search ultimately, which goes beyond the camera into something mystical and historical and all encompassing. So that's how Zora figured into the book. But you mentioned these other women, which are women geniuses of unmarked graves, people who have been somewhat lost to history or maybe not valued as they should. And so I mentioned in one of those paratextual bits that Lindsay brought up, Cuba Cornwallis, for example. And Cuba was, she was a slave, eventually got her freedom, a Obia woman, healer, became famous for it, had a certain renown and power. So she's one of them. And I'm also interested in the parallel between her name and Kwaku's name as well. And the other one, which I mentioned, is Pamela Coleman Smith,
Yes.
who is the designer of the famous Rider Waite tarot deck. She spent her formative years in Jamaica, and just very intrigued. I'd like to imagine that her and Zora would have crossed paths in a certain way, because they were, part of the New York scene during a particular period. And I think that they shared something in common. So there is no evidence that they knew each other, but they could have known of each other, and they could have crossed paths even in passing. And so I play with that as well. And there are others sprinkled here and there also. So this is an archive, and this is an archive which is interested in bringing to the fore those bits and pieces, those personalities, those energies and entities which could very well be forgotten or buried too far deep under. And so that's what I'm trying to bring to the fore and to weave them into the story.
It almost feels like, that work of trying to bring to the forefront these lost figures or shrouded figures is a part of what you refer to in the text as a kind of collective healing, right? Like this
Yes.
project, in my opinion, about collective healing. And so I wonder if you could say a bit more about like how the Jamaica Collection is a literal or a affective vehicle for collective healing when we're talking about these Caribbean and diaspora histories.
Right. Yeah, healing. I'm glad that you bring that up. For the marvelous equations, it's dedicated for the healing of the nation. And I feel that I could have also used that language for this one as well, for the healing of the nation. It's part of that whole healing stream, you might say. And the book is conscious of the ways in which we need to be stewards of the environment, for example, stewards of flora and fauna. It's conscious of the ways in which species are endangered or the shoreline is disappearing. So there's that sort of balm which we need to enact as well. It's also an invitation for us to be each other's keepers as well. And there are lots of examples of that in the book. There's Quaco and the Mill Girl, for example. The Mill Girl literally guards Quaco. It is her role to quick time cut off his finger or his hand, lest it be caught into the mill. And you know that I would say that 20A and Tough also share a similar relationship as well. And also ABBA and the Sh girl. There's a way in which the Sh girl, in a coded sort of way, sends messages to ABBA as to how she can get away, move away, escape, you might say, move on. And so there are all many examples of these sorts of relationships in the book, where there are examples of people caring for each other, and an invitation for the reader also to mull over what it means to be a steward of ourselves, of each other, of the environment. I mean to raise that awareness.
You're as concerned in this novel with natural history, or as you probably would say, natural her story, as you are
Yes.
with human history. And you make mention of um, several kinds of animals that have disappeared.
Mm,
But what I found very interesting was you mentioned a First Nations woman who
mm,
had forget me not DNA.
mm.
And I was wondering if one of the ideas you were playing with is that there is no such thing as extinction. Could you tell us about that?
Yes, that is one of the ideas that I'm playing with. Um, that there's a way in which there's a way in which these extinct animals continue to exist. You know, in this book, I'm interested in three kinds of archives. There's the archive of memory, there's the archive of dream, and there's also the archive of imagination as well. And there's our stories exist in these three planes, and everything is also happening at the same time as well. And so, given this sort of cosmology, there is this way in which nothing is ever extinct because it's always all happening at the same time. So there's that. With the Taino, though, I'm looking at something particular, and the story that we were told in Jamaica, in particular, that that they were extinct and that they were wiped out with the arrival of the Spanish. And there is evidence to suggest that Taino still live among us, and that DNA is still present among us, and not just in a biological way, but also in terms of culture and language as well. Taino is very much alive, maybe in ways which might not be obvious to us. So the Taino are not extinct. And likewise, there's a way in which the various species, which are supposedly extinct, also live on in other sorts of ways as well, even if it's our imagination. I mean to suggest that the imagination is something potent and alive and should not be dismissed. Same for the dream world as well. It's easy to dismiss I just had this dream. That was just a dream. But what if this is the question the novel asks: what if dreams are a source of information? What if dreams are a source of something which can't be retrieved in any other sort of way? So we have lives and then we have lives, depending on which archive you're dwelling in.
There's something about the way in which you say so much by saying so little in this text. And what I mean by that is your sort of use of refrain throughout the text. Like, this text is, it's refusing to be categorized in a genre, and so I've challenged myself to also not think of it as a particular genre. But I want to ask that question about refrain. Like, your use of refrain throughout the collection, it's both convincing and disarming, in my opinion. In particular, I'm sort of captivated by those moments that that phrase, the refrain, hear him, comes
Yeah.
back. It keeps coming back. And every time it comes back, I begin to hear him. I begin to hear Quacko. I begin to hear whales, cries. And so there's something like about the way in which you deploy refrain throughout the text. Can you say more about your uses of refrain and that poetic feeling, those moments in which you can say so much by saying so little throughout the text?
Right. The hear him in particular, which you mentioned, for people who need a little bit of context, the slave woman, the runaway slave woman, Abba, has lost her child and is listening out for him. So that's one way in which the hear him works. You know, it's this question, hear him, but it's also a question for the reader as well. It's a reminder, first of all, of the Quaco through line in the narrative, but it's also meant to, it's this it's this invitation to listen and to listen deeply. Who are the Quacos in our life? What do we need to listen to? Whose voice have we lost? Whose voice are we not hearing? I'm hoping that it has that sort of resonance as well. Hear him, which is to listen more deeply and to meditate more deeply on, you know, something of the callings which might be around us. So that's one way in which the refrain works. The refrain also works as a device too, to literally tie the various narrative parts together as well. I'm also using it, you know, it's this refrain which acts as a sort of, you know, sort of the way you would have a chorus maybe in a song, and how that pulls the song together as well. So it's being used as a narrative device.
You started speaking about the cosmology. That is that is an element of the novel I found fascinating. And you spoke about ti time not being separate. I think that's that you.
Yeah.
I think that's what you meant. Because in this novel, and I think in your previous novels as well, there's no strict distinction between time. It's almost as if what happened a century ago is happening concurrently with what is happening now.
Yeah.
And I also get the sense that you are suggesting in the novel that we are our ancestors and our ancestors are us, almost in a literal way. Very similarly to the way that in the Marvelous Equations, Bob Marley was fall down, but not even though they were not exactly the same person, they were in one sense exactly the same person. So could
Yeah.
you tell us more about the cosmology of the novel?
Yes, thank you for that. Um, I'm not interested in linear time, but I'm interested in how, as I mentioned earlier, the way in which everything is happening at the same time. So past, present, and future, they're all happening at the same time. And for this reason, stories layer in certain ways. Um, there's this term that I use for what I do, and I would call it quantum rhythm. Um, I think it was Wilson Harris who used this term quantum fiction. And I'm doing something a little bit different, and I'm calling it quantum rhythm, which is to say that, I'm interested in the quantum, and I'm interested in how I'm interested in this field which is out there, this energy which is out there, which in the book I call the Jalixer, right? Um, and I'm interested in space time and how that works as well. So, when I say quantum rhythm, I'm looking at the quantum through a particular Jamaican lens, you might say, right? And it's something of those ideas which inform the novel, and this sense that we are our ancestors and our ancestors are us, and everything is happening concurrently at the same time. I also in the book use this notion of the spiral as well, because there's a way in which everything is spiraling. There's a way in which time is spiraling as well, and the spiraling is a sort of regeneration, you might say, or transformation. And so those are some of the ideas that I'm dealing with this. You asked about my cosmology, and I would call it quantum rhythm. That's a good name for it. Theoretical physicists also say that there's this cosmic music of the universe. And in the landscape of this novel, or in my imagination, this cosmic music is bass rhythm. So that's part of the cosmology of these books as well. So it's something that I started to develop in the Marvelous Equations and continue it developing more expansively in this book as well. I hope that answers your question a little bit.
It does.
Okay.
Your sort of mention of quantum rhythm brought up for me in the moment, Kamau Brathwaite, and that now famous line, the hurricane does not roar in pentameter, right? Like it feels like your
Mm,
overarching project is one in which you recognize the limits of the English language when it comes
mm,
to telling stories about Caribbean and diaspora experiences, but also the importance of trying to find ways to tell that story anyways. That's how I interpret your sort of
yes.
explanation of quantum rhythm. So you mentioned layering, and I did have a question about layering for you. Like, I want to sort of pose it to you now. In your own words, can you say a bit more about your attention and or the application of layering techniques throughout the text and what that means for engaging with your body of work?
Right. Um, I layer stories uh, in part. It's this effort to explore how our stories are connected, and how my story is part of your story is part of my story, and so I'm looking for this way to visually and in terms of narrative as well, in various ways to explore this type of connection. In my foreword, I talk about how when I was a little girl, I used to visit my grandmother's house, and she lived in this old time Jamaican country house. They had, no electricity, no running water. And it was, she used to flower paste her walls with all of these pictures and photos and, whatever pretty paper she could find, all of that kind of stuff. And I was always mesmerized by that wall. it's more than just mosaic or collage. Um, I would like to think that there's something else going on there. You know, there is this story that, you know, the evil spirits would come and they would run away because they would get tired of reading, right? I like this notion because it shows that there's something mystical and spiritual going on there as well. So that's part of my early beginnings of what it means to, you know, uh, observe stories and people and things and uh, possibly even random objects in conversation with each other. That's certainly part of it. And the layering too is part of my exploration of space time that I mentioned earlier as well. That's all part and parcel of that effort. You know, moving away from this linear telling, and also looking for other ways to represent how we can tell our, you know, explore and narrate our Caribbean experience.
You mentioned there exploring and narrating our Caribbean experience. Um, a lot of the action, a lot of the what happens in the Marvelous Equations happens in Jamaica.
Mm,
And 20A moves as an immigrant, an undocumented immigrant, to the United States.
mm,
Um, but that's not the first movement we see in the novel
mm,
from Jamaica to the United States. Abba leaps. She takes a
mm,
leap in Jamaica and she
mm.
lands in what you call in the novel cello, which can only be Monticello, the plantation in Virginia that Jefferson, was it Jefferson? Right, it was
Yes. Mm,
Jefferson's plantation.
mm,
Um, now, you mentioned that this, in the foreword, that this, one of the concerns of the novel is connectivity.
mm.
Um, and there is also the mention of, was it a character in this novel? I don't know if I'm mixing it up with a novel. Yes, it must be this novel.
Mm.
Uh, that one of the characters, was it 28? It was 28 who got um, papers, got a social security number from someone who had died.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
yes,
yeah,
yes,
she has heard of a story
right.
of someone who got their social security
Okay.
number in that way.
All right. So I
Right.
just wanted to know about the how you explore connectivity in this regard, and the connectivity between immigrants from Jamaica, because there's this enslaved woman who helps Abba when she leaps from Jamaica and ends up in Cello. Could
Mm.
you speak about the connectivity that you're exploring there, in generally?
Right. Yeah. I think that this hinges on a question you might have asked earlier, and or maybe it was Lindsay, about the way in which we are our ancestors and our ancestors are us, or the way in which many of these characters have a parallel of some sort. Um, so, you know, in the book, there are all of these migrations and journeys, and they're different people, but they're having arguably something of a similar experience in a certain kind of way. So 20A is running from the government. ABBA is running from the master. There's also this woman at the bottom of the slave ship as well, crossing the Atlantic. So all of this is happening at the same time in a certain kind of way. Kwako is running with the birds. And so they're, they're all having these sort of kindred experiences And that's the way in which, or at least one way in which they're intertwined and connected and layered.
I want to ask you a question about what I feel like is a project on critical fabulation. And what I'm sort of referring to by fabulation here is I'm thinking specifically with Saidiya Hartman's work and that work she does around sort of the Black Atlantic experience and sort of
Yeah.
going to the archive and using what the archive offers as a springboard to then tell us a story about those lives that the materials, the objects in those archives fail to
Yeah.
tell in a full way, right? Like,
Yeah.
is there, am I spot on here? Like, is this a thing that you are also deploying? Like, is there a relationship between fabula and the factual that is unfolding in this collection?
Yes, definitely, certainly. And this is actually what I'm playing with the various archives.
Hmm.
So when we think of the archive of memory, that's more, something more traditional. I would put in that category written documents or narratives or um, oral um, documents and memories, that sort of thing. Um, that's the sort of information which we tend to think of as factual and which we most value. But then there are these ways in which we can fill in the dots as well, with imagination and dream. I'm thinking of the story which is told in the book of how mango came to Jamaica. So the factual story that we get is that Mango came on this ship, the Flora, and Captain Marshall, came with this ship full of plants. I think it was something like 1782, right? That's what we know. But actually, there are gaps in that story because there are records which suggest that the Maroons signed their treaty with the British before that under a mango tree. And there's also a record, even in Thomas Thistlewood's journal, of him having a mango tree in his garden before that ship arrived. So, what are we to make of all of these conflicting stories within the factual archive? So this is where imagination comes in. This is where dream comes in. The dread at the dream gate tells a different story. And he helps 28 to higher stand history, you might say. And he tells the story of how the mango first came to Jamaica. So I'm enacting something of this critical fabulation there in that moment. I think that's a good example of it.
We're almost out of time. I have one very short question. What is your fascination with the color blue? I see it all over your writing.
Good question. Well, one thing that quickly comes to my mind with this one, there's this subheading which occurs and recurs, which is out of the black and blue. Um, and, you know, it suggests to me, in a way, what did I do to be so black and blue? I'm thinking of, I think it was Louis Armstrong that, these lyrics. I'm thinking of Langston Hughes and his engagement with the Jew blues and jazz and his connection to Hurston. There's some sort of bluesy jazz notes in that kind of way. What did I do to be so black and blue? But I'd like to also mention yellow, because yellow is also another color which asserts itself in this book. And I would say that yellow is a little bit of hope, just a little flash of hope, of hopefulness here and there. And so the blue and the yellow have to live together.
That's all the time we have. Before we close, Marcia is going to read an excerpt from this brilliant novel. And the next time you see us, we'll be discussing Olive Senior's Paradise Once. Yes, that's the name of it, Paradise Once. Thank you so much for joining us. Bye bye.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm reading from page 147 in the book, and this section is titled Sound Check. Bang sound, big sound, sweet tuna play, and the Kingston brown dogs will not be outdone. They bark into the wee hours alongside the sound system. Nothing like a good dog fight, found sound, rough it up or shut it up, muzzle free zone barking, first dogs, last dogs, this is how we broke it up. Full moon a shine, and the brown dogs bark our history. For their ancestors were here from way, way back. Some of them companions to Taino. They barked when 3 ships appeared on the horizon. Good souls they were. They did not know bad mind. Some ran to the hills when cares of life shook over, ate a noli lizard and dropped down guava, and learned to keep their bark quiet. Later, others came on ships, sniffing deck for dead rats, licking at the feet of Africans in chains. And look to theirself, a brown stray at the corner of Hagley Park and O'Mara has a flash of memory of a buried ancestor, surprises itself with big bark sound, stops and perks its ears up, wondering at its own howl. Every one of us, dog and human, has a mastiff relative somewhere in our DNA. Oi, long-tailed conquistador, maddened ancestor. What is your story? System check in the heart of Kingston. Check out the baseline, see what it a gwan with. Nothing like a good dog fight, found sound, groundhound, rough it up or shut it up, muzzle free zone barking. First dogs, last dogs. This is how we broke it up. Weary of heat and bark, a little dog stands at a gate. It waits for morning when an old woman will come with a bag of water crackers. Toss some through the iron grill. Whisper, "Look here, me Jesus." Thank you.